For many technical professionals, their comfort zone is process. We like frameworks, we like checklists, but very few things, including new business opportunities and the associated relationships, follow straight lines. They move because of these consistent underlying behaviors that make clients feel understood, supported, and confident as they move through this whole ambiguous sales process. Today, let's talk about all of that.
You're listening to Breaking BizDev with John Tyreman and Mark Wainwright. Conversations that break down, beat up, and redefine business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And now for your hosts, John and Mark.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Breaking BizDev. I am John Tyreman, and as always, I'm joined by my trusty co-host, Mark Wainwright. Mark, how you doing?
Good. And John, we're going to talk a little bit about trust today. So yeah, I appreciate that you have seen me be a trustworthy partner on this whole journey here.
Hey, I've got your back, you've got mine. Takes two to tango, right?
The tango thing, there it is. We're bringing it all in. So today, John, we are going to revisit something that we touched on at least a year ago, and it was part of a 3-part series, Create, Choreograph, Contract. And this episode today focuses on some key elements of Choreograph. If you want to go back and listen to that full 3-part series, great. The reason we are revisiting part of that series is over time, I have recognize the importance of these elements, and there's 8 of them.
What I like about this, Mark, is we're taking the process and we're zooming down on the actual activities that people can use to put into place. So folks that are listening to this episode, they're going to get a variety of tools that they can start to use today. So Mark, let's list out these 8 elements and then let's dive into each one of them.
Number 1 is curiosity and inquiry. Number 2 is low self-orientation. Number 3 is seeking and building understanding. Number 4 is focusing on results. 5 is synchronous conversations. 6 is mirroring and reflecting. 7 is seeking and gaining permission. And 8 is that catch-all that includes guiding, confirming, advancing, and connecting. These are important behaviors and activities and actions that we need to incorporate into how we sell to move these new business opportunities from maybes to contracts. And I want to differentiate the sales stages or the sales conversations that we've referred to them in the past, is that they are woven together. These elements, I think, support sales stages, but I used to spend a ton of time talking about sales stages, the various sales conversations as we move through the whole buying and selling process. I spent a ton of time on that with my clients, but I would tell you, as time has gone on, I have spent more and more time on these elements because I really think if people can master these, then the sales stages from qualification, discovery, proposals, negotiation, all that is more efficient, more effective, all that sort of stuff.
These are things that are within your control, right? The sales stages, they're more or less, it's at the pace of the buyer. But these activities, these are within your control. And I guess it's like those input metrics, whereas the moving through the processes is a result of these input metrics.
Great. I hadn't even sort of looked at it from that perspective, but I love it. I think that's spot on. So yeah, there's the 8, John, and let's wander through.
Yeah, so let's start with curiosity and inquiry. So if we're thinking about those activities, those input metrics, what are some examples? I know we've talked about inquiry and curiosity in the past, but how does that manifest itself in the process? What does that look like?
Right. So if we can use sort of those sales conversations as our touchstone here, qualification, discovery, proposal, negotiation, and if we are constantly exhibiting this sense of curiosity and inquiry, we are using that throughout all of those steps. So obviously qualification is when we're curious in qualification, we are coming in open-minded into our early conversations. We are not making too many assumptions fit about whether a client is going to be a good match, a good fit or not. We're being very curious. We're asking great questions, and as we are moving throughout the whole sales process, if we are maintaining this deep sense of curiosity, we are gaining greater and greater information throughout the entire process, rather than exhibiting our typical behaviors of we're the expert, we're the smartest person in the room, and we're just doing all the talking. So curiosity and inquiry lets us be the listener, lets us ask the great questions. It lets us infer our expertise throughout the whole sales process rather than being explicit about it. And I've said that in the past, but to clarify what that is that we infer our expertise through the act of asking good questions and being curious rather than needing to show the slide deck and being explicit and showing our expertise, right? So curiosity and inquiry helps us show up as the expert without talking about ourselves the whole time.
So, Mark, let's talk about the next part of this dance that happens in the sales process, having a low self orientation. So, what do you mean by that?
So this leverages some fantastic wisdom from David Maister and Charlie Green, who wrote the book, The Trusted Advisor. The trust equation, I've talked about it a handful of times. It's out there. People can look it up. But it's literally an equation, and it's focused on trustworthiness. So trustworthiness equals credibility, reliability, and intimacy in the numerator. And in the denominator, it's all divided by self-orientation. So just to translate that is we can show up more trustworthy. We can present ourselves as being more trustworthy if we have a high level of credibility. We can do what we say we're going to do. Reliability, we actually follow through and do it. And intimacy is professional intimacy. Do people feel, to our clients, to our connections, collaborators, do they feel that they can be open and honest with us? Do they feel some sort of relational closeness to us? And in the denominator, self-orientation, do we stay focused on the client and others, or do we yak and talk about ourselves all the time? That self-orientation denominator can kill everything if that score's too high. So there you go. There's the trust equation, and hence the need to show up with a low sense of self-orientation throughout the entire process.
So, if we were going door to door selling office supplies, that would be one thing. I don't think that this trust equation would probably matter as much. But since we're talking about selling professional services,
this is one of these elements that in practical application is sometimes a little hard to understand, but screamingly obvious when it's pointed out. If you're involved in professional services, particularly on the sales and marketing end of things, you've been involved with or written a proposal, right, to a prospective client. And one of the easiest exercises to do is just look through that proposal and understand, whatever, word by word, page by page, however you want to navigate your document, is just, have we completely lost track of the client in the document?
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Go to page 6. Who are we talking to? Who is the client? Where are they? Do they show up on page 6? Do they show up on page 10? Has this whole thing been completely oriented around them? Or have we created this basically glossy brochure of a proposal that is just about us? And anyone that has been involved in professional services, we can sheepishly go back and look at one of these things we've created and like, oh my gosh, yeah, there it was. On page 2, we suddenly lost track of the client. We just went off on 4 paragraphs here talking about ourselves, and we could have replaced all of that with a really meaningful articulation of our understanding of the client and their needs, or, just something that was hyper specific to the client where they read it and said, oh, yeah, these guys are completely focused on us and not themselves.
That's a great segue to the next bullet point that you've got here, Mark, which is seeking and building understanding, right? And so
Right.
understanding the client, you're able to have a lower self-orientation because you're more focused on how are they going to achieve their goals and objectives, and how are they going to overcome their challenges. So let's talk about different ways that doer sellers, people that are in a business development seat can seek and build understanding with their prospects?
So the one that's top of mind, I think, for a lot of technical professionals is, sure, we work to understand the scope, schedule, budget stuff and the technical aspects of the work, or everything that we need to respond, create a proposal, recommendations, whatever else. So that's frankly the easy stuff. The hard part is really going further to seek and then develop an understanding of the client, their people, their organizational needs, their goals, their visions of the future. This is typically just one puzzle piece in a much larger picture of some future state of success. What does that look like? So we can endlessly seek and build understanding. And again, the screamingly obvious example is when we are writing scopes of work or when we're writing proposals or whatever else, we all of a sudden find that our responses to our clients or prospective clients is all based on guesswork. It's based on assumption. And it's not really based on, I heard you say this thing was important, or these three things were important, and here's how we're going to respond to those.
Eventually, we understand what our prospect is trying to achieve. We understand what results they're trying to go out and get. And so that's the next bullet that you have here, is maintaining a focus on results.
This number 4 is focusing on results. Like you said, it's understanding the bigger picture and the bigger story around what we're doing together, and everyone aligning around, or frankly towards, that. So focusing on results, which in complex professional services is sometimes pretty far away because there's a lot going on, and these projects can be a long duration. Focusing on results keeps our eyes focused on the horizon and prevents them from wandering down to the desk in front of us, which is the weeds, right? And when we're in the weeds, we can lose track of the big results and then start making day-to-day decisions based on the immediacy of things rather than this long-term, we're in this together, we're trying to achieve these big goals. And if we're making even incremental wrong decisions, every decision we make throughout the whole process is either leading us in the right direction towards this big picture or kind of away from it. You've seen the horror movies, John. I mean, that's where the problems come. When you're wandering through the weeds, people are walking along the nice road and they're like, oh no, let's cut across the field. And you're like, dude, do not cut across the field. Do not walk through the cornfield. Don't do that. So yeah, just stay on the big road, keep going straight. There you go. That was a funny analogy.
There you go. Yeah, that was a good one.
You're listening to Breaking BizDev,
The podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. Your hosts are John Tyreman, founder of Red Cedar Marketing, the podcast marketing company for experts and professional services firms,
and Mark Wainwright, principal consultant and founder of Wainwright Insight, the fractional sales manager and sales consultant to professional services firms.
If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by following the show and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts.
And now, back to the show.
So the next bullet point you have here is synchronous conversations. And I know that we've talked about this in the past and the importance of synchronous conversations. It seems like people these days are very used to email exchanges and some even like sending videos back and forth. But why is having synchronous conversations so important, especially in the sales process?
Yeah, one of the common refrains is that meeting could have been an email. We hear that. We hear that a lot, which is a little bit opposite from the direction we're headed right here. So, but yeah, I really insist on people prioritizing the steps in the sales process and making them conversations. The initial qualification conversation, discovery conversation, all these things need to be happening live. There are all of the obvious benefits, right? We can hear tone, we can see body language, we can sense hesitation. If people have questions in the moment, we can recognize those and address them. We are elevating each step in the process to the level of importance because we're both taking time out of our busy schedules to have a live synchronous conversation. And it's not going to be three people misreading an email they were CC'd on, and then communication just completely blows up and goes sideways. We're in a room, either literally or virtually, having a conversation, interacting, reacting to what's said, what we understand, etc. And a lot of people assume that this whole need to have a series of synchronous conversations throughout the whole sales process will slow things down. But in reality, John, it speeds things up because you don't have to deal with the meeting after the meeting, or you email the proposal over as a PDF attachment with your fingers crossed, hoping that they don't misunderstand it. We don't deal with that because we're having a live synchronous conversation. We're sharing, we're reacting, we're addressing questions, concerns, etc. live. So it actually speeds things up. Sure, it front loads some effort, some time, but it saves time on the back end because we don't have to go back and forth 16 times with all these different revisions and adjustments because we didn't communicate something clearly enough through that random email or whatever else. So this is the whole literal don't send the email, pick up the phone, have the conversation. It's critical.
Well, pick up the phone and have the conversation, but this expectation could also be set at the onset of the process where we're going to have a series of conversations. And I guess to your point, you've advocated in the past, Mark, for don't send that proposal in an email, have a synchronous conversation and review it. I suppose in doing that, the prospect is more attentive in those conversations because they don't have that safety net of, oh yeah, just email that to me and I'll review it later.
The time and energy and effort that you invest in putting together your proposal, your recommendations, your ideas is more than worth your client's time. So do not ever take that terse little
That's a good
note they
point.
send to you and says, hey, I don't have time. Can you just send it to me? It's like, actually, I can't, because there's going to be a lot of questions. And this is going to speed up our process if we're able to have this conversation. If you can't meet on Tuesday, let's reschedule for Thursday. You're also making sure that everybody, yourself included, understands the value of the information that you are, communicating, right? You're like, look, there's a lot of really useful information in this proposal. We've worked really hard to build a really good understanding. We want to make sure we're right there. And we've made a series of recommendations with prices, et cetera. And we spent a lot of time and energy on this. And it's well worth your time to sit through this conversation, 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so, to really help you navigate the information we're communicating. And, if they don't, if they're just doing the, just send it over in an email thing, they're thinking this is a transactional process, and it is not.
They're probably shopping around. Yeah.
Yeah, they're shopping around, right?
Well, when you're in those synchronous conversations, there are some hand-to-hand tactics that you can use that can really help you navigate those conversations, and that leads us to our next bullet point on the list here of choreography, mirroring and reflecting. I think this stems from Never Split the Difference. Do I have that right? By Chris Voss?
Yeah, he uses mirroring and reflecting a ton. It's all over the place. So mirroring and reflecting, yeah, it's part and parcel, it hand in glove with understanding. And this is technique, so it's probably a little more tactical than sort of strategic, but it's constantly reflecting back, not just in person, but also after the fact, in your follow-up and everything else. You're reflecting back what you've understood, what was said. You're constantly clarifying. Look, did I miss anything? Can you make sure that I, heard this correctly? And the word mirroring has a bunch of different terms. I think mirroring can even happen live in a synchronous conversation, that you are mirroring someone's posture, tempo, cadence, tone, whatever else it is. So yeah, this is a common technique used in a bunch of different ways, in a bunch of different situations, but super important to use in the sales process because it's critical that we as experts, we as consultants, are open to hearing all this information, and then we're constantly checking and rechecking that we heard it correctly, that we understood them right. Because yeah, we're going to take the information we're gaining right now in this conversation, and we're going to turn it into some recommendations. And if we didn't hear you right, then our recommendations are going to be off the mark.
We're getting a little tactical here, but we've talked about this in the past too, as having a statement of understanding in your proposals is just kind of like
Yep.
this big reflection of everything that you've heard throughout the process.
Right. That's sort of, the culmination of all these conversations, all this information we've gathered. because that forms this big statement of understanding. Again, it ties to another one of these elements here. It's the statement of understanding is the culmination of all this, the gathering and the collection of all this information, and it is what our recommendations are based on, what they are founded on. And if we're not correct, if our foundation has cracks or is missing information or there's too much guesswork, then our subsequent recommendations aren't going to be complete or accurate or whatever.
So that those are a couple, macro and micro ways that you can use mirroring and reflecting. The next bullet that we've got here under this umbrella of choreography is seeking and gaining permission. Why is this so important, Mark?
Yeah, this is so important that somebody wrote a book about it called Permission-Based Selling. It's that important, and it is hyper tactical. And if you don't recall hearing it live, I think a lot of people can maybe think back on situations when they were in a buying selling situation, or maybe any other situation where people are using this technique. So yes, this is very tactical, and it is constantly sort of just asking them to opt in, asking the person on the other side of the table or your prospective client or whoever we're talking about here, getting their permission, getting their buy-in, for a typically sort of a next action or a next step, right? So it's not I'm going to send you a proposal. Is it okay, or does it make sense for me to send the proposal over to you? And then you get a response, right? Hyper technical. It's like, yeah, great. So now they've agreed to it and they're expecting it. Those are the two huge components, is that, anything you send over to them isn't going to drop into their inbox, or the phone call you make to them is not going to be unexpected. Is it okay if I follow up with you via phone on Thursday? Yes. Okay. So now they've opted in, they've given you permission, and they're expecting it. The power of getting someone to opt in and sort of open the door and give you the green light on a next action is super important, because you're not going to use it as this big lever. So if you're constantly seeking and gaining permission and people start reneging or not following through or whatever else, frankly, those are signs that might not be a really fantastic client to work with. If they're saying, yeah, I'll get back to you on Thursday. Absolutely. Is it okay? Yeah, great. And then nothing happens, and then it blows up.
I'm just thinking of different times where this has happened to me, and it's happened quite a bit. But I think that it's such a small thing, but it's subtle. But I can see why that's so effective, right?
Yeah.
Would you mind if I added you to my newsletter? Would you mind if I sent you that podcast episode we were talking about? Would you mind if I? Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great little tool that folks that are listening can put in their tool belt.
Yeah, and understand when and how it's used, and put it in your own language and make it yours and make it your own.
Yeah.
It can be overused. Even the slightest hint of, any sort of sales technique can be a trigger for a lot of people. And this is one that is used by people who are professionals. So use it appropriately.
Yeah, I like that, because especially if you're doing it in little bite-sized chunks, because then that reinforces trust, because you're doing what you say you're going to do. We
Right.
talked about that trust equation earlier.
Yeah, right. Good point.
Awesome. So let's talk about this last little catch-all category that we've got here for choreography: guiding, confirming, advancing, and connecting. And to me, this seems like, if two people are dancing, someone's got to take the lead, right? Is that kind of what we're going for?
Yeah, and these could be split out. Who knows? But I saw them as all kind of close siblings, So I added them into this sort of last point, number 8 catch-all. But yeah, guiding is, yes, a lot like dancing. There needs to be a leader. There needs to be a guide. And I think a lot of people, particularly when they're thinking about sales and what it looks like and feels like to be salesy, it's pushy, but the best salespeople are the best guides. So we're not pushing in a pushy way. We're guiding. We're showing the way, right? We've got the flashlight out. It's a little mysterious because sales can be a little ambiguous. So it's important that we, as the skilled sales leader, are guiding the process, and we're laying it out very clearly. We're being very communicative about what our next steps are and where we're headed. So, it just shows them that we know the way, we know the path, we know how this works.
I want to contrast this real quick with the high self-orientation, pushy salesperson, right? They're trying to push the process through. Whereas the choreography elements that we've outlined on this podcast episode, really we're seeking to understand, we're showing that we're listening, we're getting buy-in at every step of the way. So we're not really pushing, but we're gently moving everything forward when the buyer's ready at their pace.
And even one of the things we talked about earlier about, those synchronous conversations, sometimes we're even putting the brakes on to say, no,
Yeah.
I'm not going to just email this thing over to you for the sake of time. This is important. So we're going to have a conversation about it. If you can't talk today, we're going to talk Thursday. So we're actually slowing things down and not being pushy. We're walking through this appropriately, and you're acting like a good guide. You're saying, look, that's not the way. That's not the way this is going to be successful for either one of us. This is the way. So there you go. Next sort of sub bullet in this one is confirming. And confirming is just that little simple move that says, okay, we've had these 2 conversations to date. Here's the information we discussed. Did we get that right? Great. Is everybody on board? Now let's move ahead, right? And sometimes this comes into play when they're adding a new person into the conversation. Maybe it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to bring in 2 other people in the conversation. So it's right at the outset of the conversation, we're saying, did everybody read that follow-up summary email about the first 2 conversations? If not, let's take a moment to do that. You give them 5 minutes to read it. Everybody is up to speed. So we're not constantly circling back.
Right.
Confirming
Yeah.
means that we're all at the same place together.
That's what makes most productive use of your time,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We can't constantly be looping back. So we're not going to loop back. So that then leads us to the next one, which is advancing. And advancing says that now that we're all up to speed, let's move forward. Whether it's a little bit or a lot, let's advance. Let's move forward. And
Mhm.
that advancing to me is all about, momentum. It's all about the energy and the engagement and the attention being paid to, what you're trying to achieve together. It's that thing. It's like, even if it's a little baby step forwards, let's keep moving forwards to keep the momentum moving in the right direction. So the last one is connecting. And connecting is this thing that says every step in the process, whether it's a big one or a small one, let's just have a quick conversation to make sure we're on track. Every step in the process is connected. So we've got a plan, we've got an agenda for this next conversation. We execute the conversation goes well, we take our notes, we have good conversation, whatever else. We set next steps, we ask permission, we gain buy-in, everybody opts into our next step. We execute the next step. At the conclusion of the next step, we set another next step, right? So this is a chain of activities.
Yeah.
And this can apply to anything in our lives. But in the sales process, we have to make sure everything connects, because as soon as we see a break in the chain, as soon as there's a dip in the conversation, as soon as the momentum grinds to a halt, anything else, the probability of success for us, the consultant, drops. The probability of the client actually achieving these visions of success drops, right? So it's not just us, it's them, right? So if we're truly client oriented, if we have a low self orientation, it's like, look, if we stop now, you're not going to get what you need. You're not going to achieve what you need to achieve here. So let's keep going. Let's set our next step. So we're connecting all these activities together.
Well, we know from looking at, I think it was the SPI research that showed that being organized and process driven is one of the big factors of growth in professional services, and how you implement your process matters, right? And so that's the key focus of this episode. So, Mark, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. Any closing thoughts?
The one thing that comes to mind is that these are all things that are within your control to execute and practice throughout the whole sort of seemingly ambiguous sales process. People just think it's completely up to the client. Actually, we have a number of different things that we can use throughout this whole process to make sure it's moving, make sure it's on track, make sure that we're constantly having these synchronous conversations that are advancing things forward. So there's a ton of tools in your toolkit, tool belt, tool shed, wherever you keep your tools. There's a ton of stuff that you can turn to and use throughout the process in order to turn these maybes into a yes.
All right. Well, I think maybe a good reflection question for our listeners that we can part ways with is, what is one of these elements of choreography that you can put into practice right now with your existing clients, with prospective clients, new opportunities, anywhere in your sales pipeline and your sales process, you can apply some of these key elements of choreography. Well, Mark, this has been a fantastic conversation. Until next time.
Thanks, John. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Breaking BizDev. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or listen to the show at breakingbizdev.com. This episode was produced by Red Cedar Marketing. If you think a business podcast is right for your company, visit redcedarmarketing.com to learn more.